Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legends of Tomorrow podcast. Now, this is going to be probably a bit of a shorter one because Greg could not make it today, so he is very sorry that he couldn't, but he will be on the next episode. But I do have Alan here with us. He has been on episodes before for Legends of Tomorrow. So, Alan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Alan Sizzler. I'm a comic book historian and a consulting geek. I've been writing articles about the evolution and history and representation of comic books, sci-fi, and some related media for about 10 years now. I wrote the New York Times bestseller Doctor Who: A History and the unofficial Game of Thrones cookbook. And I do the podcast Crazy Sexy Geeks, which is on iTunes and SoundCloud.
Very cool. So we're actually going to start the episode with some news, and then we're going to start talking about Rip Hunter, who's our spotlight character for this week. But let's start talking about the news that came out, which is our first piece of news, which is, hopefully I can pronounce her name right, Stephanie Corneliussen joins Legends of Tomorrow as Valentina Vostok, who is, I'm pretty sure, Negative Woman from Checkmate. Do you know anything about this character, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, Negative Woman started off as a Doom Patrol character and was sort of the second generation of Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol was a weird sort of atmospheric mix of Fantastic Four and X-Men in the DC universe. And we're sort of the lovable freaks team. And then they went away for a while, and then there was the second generation team that was meant to be more straightforward superhero action. And where there had been Negative Man in the original roster, we now met Negative Woman, who apparently was inhabited by the same negative energy construct that the original Negative Man had been inhabited by. And she was sort of this straightforward character where she wore this like Negative Man before her wore these radioactive bandages and would release the negative entity from her body, and it would do strange things and help out people. It was sort of like calling on a genie.
And how do you think she's going to play a part in Legends of Tomorrow?
I mean, we're going back and forth through time, so they might play up with, hey, before the heroes you knew today, they were other heroes of just 20 years ago or something, or 30 years ago that you didn't know of. Picking a Russian character in a time travel series, I'm immediately curious if you're going to do a Cold War story.
Ooh, I hope so. That'd be really, really interesting. So let's hope. So let's move on to the next news piece, which is Peter Francis James is going to be a focus character for Hawkman and Hawkgirl. I don't know much about the actor, but do you know anything about the actor that you might know what type of character he could play? I think he's going to play a doctor on the show. At least that's what IMDb said.
I mean, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, there are so many directions you can go with it. Peter Francis James, I mean, he's definitely got a distinguished look to him. So I'd be curious if he could play maybe their enemy, Haster, who was sort of the original priest that killed them in their first life, and then while they would be reincarnated, he was actually a spirit that just stayed on Earth and kept inhabiting descendants of his bloodline, and which is many, many people because of how long ago he lived. So I'm curious if they're going that direction, if maybe this is some version of Haster that shows up. But there are so many characters from the Hawkman, Hawkgirl mythos you could do. This could be the Gentleman Ghost for all I know, or it could just be a new colleague of theirs who maybe is an expert in archaeology and helps them understand who they were originally.
Yeah. I think there's so many possibilities with it. I'm really excited. So this news piece is kind of a spoiler type thing. So if you guys don't want any spoilers for Flash, skip a little. But Alan, I don't know if you heard about this, but there's a new trailer that came out, and there's another side of Firestorm we might have seen, and maybe a character, Jay Jackson, might be connected to Firestorm. So we didn't know anything about Jay Jackson until now. Did you hear about this, or?
I haven't. I've been busy the past couple of days. Is it looking like it's Jason Rush or what?
It looks like him, but I think the interesting thing is that we've already seen Jason Rush on Flash. So
right, I remember.
Replacing him, I'm not sure, but it looks like Jason Rush. that'd be really cool if it is.
I would love if Jason Rush became. I mean, especially now that you're the way they're setting up Ronnie, that he's married to Caitlyn and everything. I would sort of be okay with if Ronnie gets some cure from being Firestorm, and so that he can sort of settle and become. Especially if you're making Caitlyn into more of an active player or making her Killer Frost, I would kind of dig a reverse on things if Ronnie became sort of the stay-at-home love interest and she became more proactive as a hero or villain, but his curse, transformation, whatever, gets transferred to Jason. Because that's part of the beauty of Firestorm. It wasn't there originally, but starting in the 80s, it became more of this force that would go from person to person.
Yeah, I would love that. And I hope this is like, I hope it's Jason. I don't know if it will be, or maybe it's going to be like the replacement of Jason, but have the same attitude
Right.
as Jason. But I think it's a smart move, especially because Robbie Amell has a lot of projects coming up also. And I would like to see him more with Caitlyn anyways, like you said, and maybe kind of play like more of the being at her side, which is really cool. So
Or even in the comics, you could play it with Ronnie dying, because in the comics, the original way that Jason becomes Firestorm is that Ronnie died, and the energy went out and found someone else, and became Jason. And there's a great run. I forget who was still writing it, but Jamal Igle did the art, and it was fantastic. Where at one point Jason sort of winds up connecting to / communing with Ronnie's spirit, that there's still an echo of him in the Firestorm Matrix. And it was this really lovely parting of company, and Jason being able to finish Unsettled Business. I mean, Ronnie being able to finish Unsettled Business, and then also Ronnie giving this blessing of it. Yeah, it sucks that I died, and my spirit is now going wherever it is that it'll go, but you're great as Firestorm, and I wish you luck. And it was this really beautiful moment. So yeah, you could also play it that way.
Yeah, I remember that arc. I think Firehawk was in that arc also.
Sure.
I know she was a big part. I really love that run of Firestorm.
It was great.
It was really good. And hopefully in Flash or / Legends of Tomorrow, they could work with that, because I think Firestorm has such a cool, rich history, which it seems like they are delving into. So that is actually all the news that came out for the past 2 weeks for Legends of Tomorrow. So let's get started. Talk about our spotlight character, Rip Hunter. So let's talk about his first appearance. Who created him, and what is his origin? So Alan, do you know his origins, and you want to enlighten us?
So Rip Hunter, Ripley Hunter, showed up in Showcase issue 20 in 1959. And Showcase was a DC comic series that basically was sort of a tryout book. It was an anthology of different stories, and if you thought you had a character that maybe could spin off into their own thing, you tried them out in Showcase for a story or three, saw how people reacted to it. If they weren't into it, no problem. Maybe you'll do more stories with them down the line, maybe you won't. If they're into it, give him his own series. And Ripley Hunter was the leader of a team of time travelers, whom we jokingly called the Time Masters, and it was sort of a takeoff of the Challengers of the Unknown, which had appeared a few years earlier in DC Comics and were Jack Kirby co-creation. And the Challengers of the Unknown were these four experts who had survived a plane crash and got together, and then became monster hunters / mad scientist fighters / adventurers. And a lot of comics sort of borrowed that formula for their own thing. Jack Kirby's later co-creation of Fantastic Four is very similar to Challengers of the Unknown. And so Rip Hunter and Time Master and his team were very much in the same vein. And they were created by Bob Wayne and Louis Shiner, and yeah, it was Rip Hunter along with his buddy Jeff Smith, Rip's girlfriend Bonnie Baxter, and Bonnie's younger brother Corky, because you need the kid running around. And in Rip's time sphere, he was sort of, it was a weird setup where he had a few adventures in Showcase, then he got his own series in '61, and that went on for a couple years until '65, so 4 years, and they were sort of these history archaeologists in a different way, where someone would often come to them and say, you know, we have this document describing this strange thing in ancient Egypt, but we can't imagine what it really was, and we found this artifact that only deepens the mystery. And Rip would be, oh, well, we'll go to ancient Egypt and we'll find out directly. And they would all go and have this grand adventure. They would sometimes fight aliens and mad scientists themselves. They'd go back in time and fight, you know, strange conquerors, and it was all a romp. It was all just high-flying fun. And it was sort of like this wave of really fun and popular, and then no one really cares. And so he vanished for a long time. He had a couple sporadic appearances then in Challengers of the Unknown, but he really wasn't seen again as a headliner until in Superman comics in the 80s, when they introduced him alongside other characters that DC had stopped publishing for years. And they had them all in a team literally called the Forgotten Heroes. And you found out that at some point they'd been investigating this strange gold pyramid, and Vandal Savage was behind it, and bad things were happening, and he gathered together a force called the Forgotten Villains, and now the Forgotten Heroes and the Forgotten Villains were going to have a showdown, and Superman had to help out, and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, for a long time, Ripley Hunter was he wasn't even like a C-list character. He was, remember Rip Hunter? Probably not.
He's D-list.
Yeah, he was just one of those weird guys you saw in the early 60s who then didn't show up again. And then he showed up in this Superman story. And then in Crisis on Infinite Earths, you brought him up again. And after the Crisis, and after DC rebooted a lot of its history yet again in the mid-'80s, people kind of became more fascinated with the implications of Rip Hunter, because he had his time sphere, and the Legion of Superheroes had time spheres, and then Booster Gold was introduced after the Crisis, and in his comic, a new version of Rip Hunter was introduced, who was studying time travel and trying to master it with his friend, and invents this first time sphere, and is able to go into the future, and is just excited, and then discovers that the way time travel works is there are only a few forms of time travel that work, and a person can only use one form. So if you use the time sphere, you personally can't use a time sphere again. Someone else can. You have to figure out another method of time travel to time travel again. And this was part of the fact that DC, after the Crisis, part of where the Crisis happened was that certain people at DC came to believe that all of their time travel stories and parallel universe stories that they'd done over the decades had added to confusion rather than adding to a sense of wonder or amazement. So there was this idea now to put up strict rules about time travel in the post-Crisis universe so that other writers couldn't just do time travel stories whenever they wanted. They really wanted to limit that. So now there was a new Time Masters miniseries in which Vandal Savage was a major villain. And this is part of what made Vandal Savage a bigger character than he had been for years. And in it, Rip Hunter had a group of specialists. So he sort of, at a certain point, had exhausted most of the ways a person could time travel. So he couldn't do it directly anymore. So he had to work through agents who would use one method and take another method with them so that they could make a return trip. And so it was sort of like that. And then you would see him maybe guest star in Animal Man if Animal Man needed to time travel or something. And it didn't really catch on. People were sort of, I think rightfully so, felt a little cheated by how limited this form of time travel was, and how seemingly arbitrary that rule was, especially when you still accepted so many other things in the DC universe, like the New Gods, and Flash, and that he had his cosmic treadmill, and Superman being able to do everything a Superman could do. So it seemed weird that this one corner of the DC universe, that when it came to time travel, it was too obviously an editorial edict rather than a storytelling thing.
Yeah.
And then DC sort of confused it more because they introduced another version of Rip Hunter a couple years later in Superman comics. Superman met the Linear Men, who were a group of time travelers that sort of made sure history stayed on course. They made sure that everything stayed in that linear continuity. And one of them was this older version of Rip Hunter from the future, who was white-haired and a cyborg. And so we sort of went, oh, I guess Rip Hunter one day will do that. But now he wasn't even the leader of the Linear Men. He was like second in command to the Linear Men. And as every story went on, he was just sort of there. He was almost there for exposition. He really didn't stand out. And so yeah, he was just part of that crew. And then late 90s, they came up with this whole other explanation of and by this point, there had been enough time travel stories that it was obvious DC was no longer caring about those. You have to use a different method every time you time travel. Like, no, that obviously is not the case anymore. The Flash was using his time platform. The Linear Men had these wrist things that looked a lot like the vortex manipulators in Doctor Who. People are pretty much now finding ways to time travel where they don't have to blow up that machine and use a different machine next time. So they went. So after they did away with that rule, you came up with yet another origin for Rip Hunter, where the Linear Men had seen him and that he had invented this form of time travel and kept going on these wild adventures. So he was very much like his pre-crisis version again, and basically that the Linear Men eventually recruited him because he was too reckless to just let go alone and do this all the time. Which was fine, but didn't really add anything to the character other than, wow, you used to seem a lot more fun. And then you had you also had this idea at one point that someone introduced the idea of actually Rip Hunter was one of the few people who remember DC Universe before the Crisis. He wasn't affected by the Crisis changes, and so all these weird time travel trips he'd gone on before the Linear Men recruited him were because he was trying to find the pre-Crisis universe. So that was a fun little wrinkle to it. Again, like I said, like the Linear Men just weren't that interesting. They seemed more like continuity cops or editorial control than characters who could be explored. And eventually they just got wiped out in another Superman story. And then there's like some other version of them that came back, but no one really cared. It's true. They just seem so limited and such stick in the muds. But then Jeff Johns, when he was writing Justice Society of America, introduced the classic version of Rip Hunter just with a different, more updated outfit. And then Jeff Johns started writing the Booster Gold series, the new Booster Gold series. And in it, Rip Hunter showed up and now gave this whole origin of he's actually not native to modern day DCU. He has spent a lot of time in modern day DCU, but that he was born some point in the future, that Rip Hunter isn't even his real name, that it's an alias he used because he doesn't want someone to know who he is so that they can go back in time and kill him in his crib. So Jeff sort of brought back the 60s version of Rip Hunter, but gave it this modern day twist. And which actually works because, we don't see him as a kid in that 1959 story either that introduces him. He's already an adult. So who's to say he wasn't born 50 years down the road and just came to that year after discovering time travel and was pretending to discover it with his friend from college. So that sort of breathed new life into Rip Hunter. And since then, Jeff Johns, because he became such a big wig at DC, has been doing a lot of the crossover events or the major events like the 52-week series and things like that has had Rip Hunter in them because he likes Rip Hunter, and he likes using Rip Hunter as this time traveler who's aware of a lot, but he's not omniscient. And he's also looking out for certain things that are changing history down a new course, or that are showing signs of the multiverse interacting with our timeline. And so yeah, that's, I'm aware this is a little confusing to folks because it's time travel plus continuity revisions
Plus DC.
but plus, yeah, exactly. But yeah, in a nutshell, Ripley Hunter is the alias of a time traveler who will be born sometime in the future. We, the readers, know that he apparently is Booster Gold's son and yet to be born. And he is the creator of the Time Sphere, which is Earth's major form of time travel, which is also later used by the Legion of Superheroes. And so, yeah, and that at some point or another, he does recruit his team called the Time Masters, and he might recruit another team called the Time Masters in the future again.
Now, is he in the New 52 at all? Because I think he was mentioned in Justice League International from what I've read, but he's not really anywhere in the New 52.
Right. He's been mentioned. We assume he's out there in some fashion. But as far as I've heard, he's not shown up at all in the New 52. I mean, the last time we really saw him at all was in Flashpoint, which was right before the New 52. And I think he might have been in Convergence recently, but that crossover was, again, that was about previous timelines and alternate universes. So that's not the New 52 proper.
Yeah, because I think Booster Gold had a Convergence title, so I'm sure he was in that. Or I didn't read it, so I can't. I'm not confirming it, but I'm sure if he was in Convergence, that's probably where he was. So what are, again, he has such a big history, but are there standout moments for you for this character?
I think, his stuff with Booster Gold and Jeff Johns had a really good handle on that character. As someone who is a professional time traveler, but is also has a bit of fun to him. There is a bit of a spark to him. He is someone who I think works best when you play him as an Indiana Jones type character, rather than as this strict authoritarian. And and some of those showcase stories are just dynamite because they're so wacky, they're so weird. So some of those, and I think they've collected them recently from the original Rip Hunter Time Master series. It's just fun. You see him sort of just, here's a dude with a dinosaur, and we're just taking it in stride. Like, yep, it's another day on the job. Just make sure Bonnie, keep Corky out of trouble. Beyond that, I think the best moment in between those was Mark Waid when he did the miniseries The Kingdom in the late 90s. Took the Linear Man cyborg version of Rip Hunter and finally made it seem like he was sort of an older version of the classic Rip Hunter we knew, instead of just this stick in the mud. And in that story, Rip actually goes behind the backs of the Linear Men and helps out the characters from the continuity of the Kingdom Come story, and helps out characters of the mainstream DC Universe story. And at one point describes hypertime, which DC really hasn't acknowledged much in the 21st century at all, although there was a reference to it recently, I think, in Multiversity. But Rip Hunter's basic idea was the Linear Men meant well, but he did not agree with their mission of we must make sure history is on a steady course, because time and the universe are these free-flowing things. Nature can't fully be controlled. There are always going to be new timelines created. There are always going to be old timelines dying off or splitting off into other timelines. There are always going to be parallel universes. And isn't that lovely? And his take on that and talking about it's just this kingdom of possibility, and you could see he was just in awe of that. Basically, anything you can imagine is out there, which is arguably a piece of M theory in real science, and I love that. I love that. I still didn't like that he looked like a cyborg, but I just loved that whole idea of he is a scientist who does not become so rigid about what time and history mean, because, and I think that's something that happens in certain stories where people forget a lot of science, in terms of pioneering science, takes creativity. It takes a sense of wonderment, because that's what you need to push the boundaries and to discover things and invent things. And if Ripley Hunter is a man who invented time travel and then decided, let's go have fun, he's got to have that sense of wonder. He's got to have that adventure in him. So yeah, but I mean, his best stuff, outside of that series, The Kingdom, is honestly the original Showcase stuff, and then the appearances he made in the Jeff Johns Booster Gold series.
Is there any other issues you would want to recommend for people to read if they want to get into this character?
Yeah, the first 12 issues of Booster Gold are a really solid introduction to both him and Booster. He's basically a major supporting character in that initial 12 issues. So that's actually a really good introduction to him and what he's all about, as well as how varied the different time eras of the DC universe can be.
Yeah, awesome. So this is also the part of our show where we talk if this character is shown up in any other media, so animation, television, and all I could in the Bold, he was in one episode. So do you know of any other shows he was on, or is that really it also that you could find?
No, like I said, he is not a well-known character. Yeah, he was in Brave and the Bold, and I mean that's basically it. Like he's not a well-known character. He's not a terribly popular character. No. Part of that is, I think, people, even at DC, people are worried, or not worried, but anxious about how you portray a character who can travel anywhere in time. The Chronos was one series they did, and Ripley showed up there like once or twice. But they kind of got away with that because Chronos was basically a thief and sort of this charming jerk. And so he's not really a hero. So Chronos got away with being this time travel character, whereas Ripley is such this like I said, he starts off as a very Indiana Jones type character. So I think some people have really seen him as such a product of his times. They're not sure how to modernize him, and when they tried to modernize him in the 90s, it didn't work. But again, I think it's because you made time travel too strict. I don't think that was a fault of the premise. I think it's only now that Doctor Who has proven how wild we can get with time travel again, and we're at that nice point of nostalgia again, where people who are kids watching Back to the Future are now in their 30s or late 20s, and time travel is sort of back in a big way. It makes sense to me that now is when Ripley is starting to rise again. Yeah. And I think it's sort of good that there hasn't been a lot to him, because it gives you a wide canvas. It gives you a lot of freedom to interpret him. No one, like, even as familiar as I am with him, I can't say, if they change his character in terms of some stuff, I'm just going to be interested. I'm not going to be like, well, that's not the proper Ripley Hunter. Like, no, Rip Hunter is such an underdeveloped character. You can absolutely play with him. You can make him British, and it doesn't feel weird. It's just, okay, because Arthur Darvill is British, and you decided don't bother telling him to do an American accent. Why not? Like, I can't say for sure that Rip isn't British. It's yeah, you've got this wide field, and I think Legends of Tomorrow is wise to take advantage of that. then also because he is such a mystery now, that was the smart thing. What Jeff Johns did by just simply saying Rip Hunter isn't my real name, he suddenly feels less like an underdeveloped character and more like a mysterious character. Because now it's not that there wasn't any information there, is he hasn't shared that information with us. He's closed off parts of his life. And once you plant that seed in a reader's mind or in the audience's mind, then it's great because then it's interactive fiction. We're trying to fill in the blanks. We're trying to figure out what he's really up to, where did he start, how did he start, why did he start, which is sort of the same fun that people have with the Doctor and Doctor Who.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about his portrayal in Legends Tomorrow, which we were starting to touch upon. Then we're going to start talking about the actor, Arthur Darvill. He is British, so
Yes.
we've only seen a little of him with the trailer, but he seems to have this like really nice swab to him. He seems to have importance, which is good because he is going to be important for them to time travel. And I'm excited. And I really did not know anything about Rip Hunter before this show, before the trailer. So I'm really excited to learn more about him and see what spin they'll take on Legends Tomorrow, like you're saying, Alan, that he's such a, mysterious character that they're allowed to do that. So
Right.
What do you think about Arthur Darvill portraying the character? Do you think he'll do the character justice in some ways or even expand upon the character?
Arthur Darvill's an excellent actor. He's both a television and a stage actor. And he actually before... so everyone's pointing out how fun it is to have Arthur Darvill do this because he played a character on Doctor Who for a few years, and Doctor Who, of course, is all about time travel, and they had Time Lords as opposed to Time Masters. So there's that fun connection. And what I like about that is I've brought this up sometimes when people talk about casting certain people. I like when I can see someone do something different than what they've done before. So the fact that you're hiring Arthur Darvill because of his character connection to time travel is cute, but what's great about that is he is not playing at all the same type of character he played on Doctor Who.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, like the character in Doctor Who is, his character Rory was heroic, but in that sort of, it is not at all in my nature to seek adventure kind of way. I never quite know what I'm doing. Why can't we just find a comfortable pub and eat chips and watch the game? Why can't I just sit down with my wife and watch something on Netflix and chill? Like, why? And he was not someone ever seeking for adventure. He was someone who would take up the sword because his friends needed him, but otherwise was such like, let's just stay at home. Whereas Rip Hunter, as Arthur Darvill, we're seeing, immediately brings off this air of confidence, of professionalism, not necessarily authority, but there's sort of that Sherlock Holmes idea of,
Definitely.
I know what I'm doing. There's sort of, it's professionalism, it's experience, but there's also sort of a roguishness to him. So he almost seems more like a consultant than a leader to the team, which I rather like, and which I think would work best because he is someone who, in some of the time travel stories we eventually saw him in, he'll sort of push people into the right places, but it's still got to be them. He's not taking over the time stream. He's not completely manipulating history to his ends. You've got to do what's in your character to do. And I think I see an element of that there. And I think he'll play it beautifully and with charm and subtlety. Like, one, he's a gifted comedian, so he's got a great sense of banter and timing, and that's essential. And then also, yeah, he's got a wide range. I mean, like I said, he's been in Doctor Who, but before Doctor Who, he was on stage with Matt Smith. That's
Wow.
actually where they met for a couple of years, I think. And then also he's done radio dramas for Dark Shadows on BigFinish.com. And he also did a great radio drama for BigFinish.com where he plays Victor Frankenstein. And he was brilliant in that. You can go listen to that on BigFinish.com. He's absolutely brilliant as Dr. Victor Frankenstein, as this tortured but so arrogant, so self-involved scientist. So yeah, I mean, Arthur can play anything,
Yeah.
and yeah. So I'm excited for that. I think we're definitely going to have to play with someone who, while he wants them to fix history or make sure that things don't go askew, he's also not going to tell the answers. I'm guessing we're going to have quite a few coy remarks where he maybe hints at hidden mysteries around other characters or what their fates will be, in the same way that Wells's newspaper hinted at the future of the Flash and Arrow TV shows.
Yeah. That leads into the next question. Do you think he's going to play a big role in the show? And do you think he'll be in the battle or on the sidelines? And for me, I think he's going to obviously play a big role because, they got time travel, so they kind of have to use him. And I think he's going to be more of a sideline character. I don't want to say it would be like a Felicity or, a Cisco in season 1 that they are always in like the room and, telling them what to do.
Right.
Yeah, so I do think that's the role he's going to take. I don't think he's going to be in the battlefield. That's going to be for the rest of the team. He's just going to be their mentor, or like a Harrison Wells, really, like you said. So yeah, I think he'll play a major role, just not in the fighting portion. It's just kind of to make the team a team.
Yeah,
and he's going to play a role with that.
Yeah, and the fact is, in the original comics, Rip Hunter had like boxing and martial arts abilities to some degree, and he could definitely throw down a fight, but they're not fighting people. They're fighting Vandal Savage's army of presumably well-trained people. There's apparently a giant robot at some point. God knows what supervillains will show up. So on that alone, he wouldn't be adding a lot that Hawkman, Hawkgirl, Heatwave, Firestorm, and the others couldn't do. And you've already got White Canary as such a badass fighter anyway.
Definitely.
So yeah, they're just story-wise, there wouldn't be as much a need for him there. On top of that, yeah, I agree. I think he's sort of going to be the ferryman, bringing everyone to where they need to be, and then probably just either sticking with the time machine, so that it doesn't get nicked and taken away, or if he's only got the one time sphere, whatever he's going to be using, just taking them all and then saying, all right, I'll be back here in 2 days. So, do what you got to do and then meet me here in 2 days. And he just vanishes again. So I think he'll sort of be the bookends where he's heavily involved in the very beginning and the very end of this conflict.
Yeah.
Maybe once Vandal Savage, maybe once there's a confrontation with Vandal Savage, he will be there, which would be great because, as I said, in the 80s, when he was with the Forgotten Heroes, and then again in the 90s with Time Masters, they did develop that there was this enemy rivalry with Vandal Savage, which is interesting because then you've got Vandal Savage, who has been fighting Rip Hunter and his forces throughout time, but for him it's been in the correct order, and he sort of sees maybe here he's fighting a younger Rip Hunter than he was 10 years before with different teammates or whatever. Like, he's seeing various versions of Rip Hunter over the years. So it's kind of funny to have that rivalry from two different perspectives. And likewise, there are probably adventures he's already experienced that Rip Hunter has not. And so it's that'll be a fun perspective to play with.
Yeah, that's gonna be really fun. Hopefully they do play with that. So next is how do you think he's gonna interact with the other teammates? I think it's gonna be fun because like I said, he has charisma, so it'll be cool to see his charisma against Brandon Routh's charisma, the Adams, because they kind of have like that same type of humor. And then of course, like Rip Hunter say something to Captain Cold, and Captain Cold not really liking what he has to say. But at the same time, like you were saying, Alan, I think he's gonna be like the leader, at least for the first episode. Like, people are gonna look up to him. It's like, all right, he knows what he's doing, so we'll listen to him for a little while. So I think he'll definitely have people's respect, which is gonna be cool to see in the first couple of episodes. We'll see if he'll still have the respect by the end, depending on what happens in the show. But I think that's where it's gonna start. But how do you think he's gonna interact with everybody?
I mean, you've got a villain like Captain Cold, of course, is probably going to be very skeptical that he even is a time traveler, or that he's not manipulating things for himself rather than just I'm doing this for history. So I think there's definitely going to be some biting between him and Cold or him and Heatwave. Professor Stein, you're probably going to get the skepticism of, how do you even control the forces of time travel? Because, I helped make a time portal, but, that was so dangerous, and we've seen the dangerous consequences of this. How can you make a career out of regularly going through history and the future? And I think there's absolutely going to be a distance, especially depending on how far he is from the future. You have one of them is going to figure out, so from his perspective, are half of us dead? And that kind of creeps you out, because you start thinking like, so basically to him, he's talking to a ghost right now, and am I one of those ghosts?
Yeah.
And why can't he tell me? So yeah, I can imagine there being some guidance from him, but also some frustration with him, and never really knowing where he stands on certain things. And there is a similar charm with Brandon Routh, but one thing is that with Brandon Routh's character of Ray Palmer becoming the Atom, in the Office, he is in command, he's in charge, he's on familiar ground. As the Atom, he's a little more slapsticky, he's out of his element a little bit, although he means well and he seems to get results, but he is out of his element, and that's where his comedy comes in. Whereas this is Rip Hunter's element. Time travel, putting together agents to do what he needs to be done throughout the time stream, that's his job. So he's going to be very, very in command. You'll probably also have him occasionally making references, which he then decides not to explain for simplicity's sake, and that always will frustrate people. Like, don't treat me like a child. Like, well, I'm sorry, but you kind of are. I can't explain. I won't explain an iPhone to a person from the 1920s. I'm not going to explain the mechanics of time travel to you.
Oh man, I'm looking forward to that. That banter is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how do you think Rip Hunter is going to be telling a different time travel story compared to what Flash has already done in the past? I mean, it just seems like he time travels more, of course, and then his I guess, not banter with Vandal Savage, but his relationship with Vandal Savage is going to be a lot different than Reverse Flash and Barry. So I think that's going to be the difference. But what do you think is going to be different from this time travel story compared to season 1's time travel story and probably season 2's time travel story with Flash?
Well, I mean, Flash also, he is very much a native of one time era. Like, it is his nature to live linearly and to stay there in a straight line. And the time travel story we've seen in the Flash TV show is one of basically different people screwing up and then dealing with those consequences. Like, Wells screwed up and had to deal with the consequences and start Flash's life earlier than it should have started. And Flash learns, okay, some version of me went back in time, fought the Reverse Flash, and my mom wound up killed. But he's figuring out puzzle pieces. And it's not until he takes that jump that he finds out what else can happen. And it's very much trial and error, and we won't know until we do something with him. And once we do that, we need to get back to our right place. Whereas Rip Hunter, I mean, another thing about his character in the starting in the 90s, in the various incarnations, is they have this idea of, like, once he made time travel, however he made it, whenever he made it, he no longer considers himself to be native to one era. So he has a very different relationship with a home. And in some comics, he actually, with the Linear Men, lived in a place outside of space and time that they called Vanishing Point. And so he sort of separates himself from humanity. Barry was always, whatever he was going to do in the past, he was always going to come home because he has family, as well as, you know, the extended family of Cisco and Caitlin and everything. Rip sort of doesn't. You know, he's protective of Booster in the comics because Booster is his dad. But in the 21st century, we haven't really seen him have a sense of family or a sense of home to any native time era. He sort of belongs to the wind. And so that's different. The other thing is, like I said, Barry and the team were figuring things out through trial and error. They were hoping that what they were doing was what was supposed to happen or would undo certain things, but not in a way that killed everyone, but they couldn't know for sure. Rip is the pro. He does know what the consequences of his actions will do. So that immediately gives a very different feeling to things.
Awesome. So last thing we're going to cover for this podcast episode is that we know that Rip Hunter is the son of Booster Gold, but will we see Booster Gold in the show? Probably not, because supposedly there's plans now to make a Booster Gold and Blue Beetle movie. So how do you think that's going to play out? That Booster won't be in the show, or maybe they'll make a surprise appearance? Probably not.
I mean, maybe they'll make some veiled reference to him in the same way that Batman and the Bat characters can't be in Arrow and Flash, but you can make references to Bloodhaven, and you can bring Batman villains. So they might do some weird reached out reference in that way. Or they might just say, don't worry about it. You know, like if Flash answers like, so are any of us your ancestors? Like, nah, don't worry about it.
That's true. That could play out that way.
You know, so yeah, it's because that's the thing. What Brendan Routh was supposed to, that character was written to be Ted Cord of Cord Industries, and you had the setup where Cord Industries was mentioned in season 1 and 2, and that's also why, you know, there's an OMAC reference early in season 3 because of the connection to Ted Cord, but Ted Cord and the Blue Beetle, the Blue Beetle in general, got tied up with a possible TV project, which I think was going to have Jaime. The fact is, yeah. And I mean, they had test footage for Jaime as the Blue Beetle years back before Smallville even ended. And
he was in Smallville too, so.
He was in Smallville, yeah. Like generally, as everything I've heard, anytime people have talked about adapting Blue Beetle to live action, they've really been interested in Jaime. Yeah. Because you've got the teenage angst angle there, and the alien armor, and that's a little sexier to Hollywood than slightly overweight dude who owns his own company and then just becomes like a version of Batman or the Green Arrow with his special gun. But so anyway, point being, they changed that to Ray Palmer. And so that's how you get Brendan Routh being Ray Palmer. And likewise, if you know these same TV rights and deals are now happening with Booster Gold, where because they're trying to make that property its own thing, you don't want to, at least from their perspective, you don't want to introduce him or a different version of him in the TV show right now to muddy the brand.
Yeah, and that's understandable. You can understand why they did that. Yeah, it's business.
Exactly.
But we will find out. Hopefully, they make at least a little funny reference or something. The CW and DC TV in general are really good at doing that. But yeah, that is our show. Hopefully, you learned a lot about Rip Hunter. I know I did. I'm excited to see more about his character. So, Alan, is there anything that you want to plug and talk about?
If you have any other questions about Rip or want to chat about the upcoming plans for the DC TV shows, except Gotham. I don't watch Gotham.
Me either.
Yeah. You can reach out to me at Sizzler Kistler, SIZZLER KISTLER on Twitter. You can also find archives of my work and upcoming con appearances and signing schedules at alankistler.com. I will be at Geek Girl Con in Seattle, and I will be at Kamikaze in Los Angeles on different panels and selling books. I will also be signing at Mysterious Galaxy in San Diego in November. And check out my podcast, Crazy Sexy Geeks, on iTunes or SoundCloud.
Very cool. And also a reminder, I forgot to remind you guys, this is in the beginning of the show, but this coming week is New York Comic Con, and Legends Tomorrow is going to be there. So if you're going to be at New York Comic Con, you might want to go, get an autograph, because they're doing an autograph session too. Go see the panel, celebrate Legends of Tomorrow. So hopefully I'll be able to do something Legends of Tomorrow related when I get to New York Comic Con, but I definitely want to mention that. Also for me, go check my YouTube channel out, Comic Uno. You could go check out my group YouTube channel, Comic Frontline, and you go check out the Kickstarter for my Father Like Daughter issue 2. Now to plug Legends of Tomorrow, we have our Facebook page, facebook.com/Legends of Tomorrow podcast. Follow us at Twitter at Legends_podcast. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and YouTube. And, of course, rate us on iTunes. And if you have any questions or comments, email the Legends of Tomorrow podcast at gmail.com. So we definitely want to hear your feedback. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Alan, for coming on and helping us for the Rip Hunter Spotlight. And we will be back for the next episode. So hopefully you enjoy. See ya.